the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 20, looking at the groups and teams of the 2023 African Cup, played in Ivory Coast in January 2024. This episode is looking at Group F: Morocco, Congo DR, Zambia, and Tanzania. Here we go. It's the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada, Series 20. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor. And today we are looking at Group F, the final group for the African Cup 2023 tournament. This is a group that contains Morocco, Congo DR, Zambia, and Tanzania.
Yeah, and we usually give some information about our past, present, and future media casts at this point. If you want that, we'll direct you to the video on our YouTube homepage, which covers that information, and the address is on the screen there, and listeners will be able to find it in the show notes.
That's right. For now, we'll just say that we are currently focused on the 2023 African and Asian Cups, both being played in January 2024. And we're producing this group and team series as well as a player series for each.
Right. Okay, well, let's move on with this one.
Yeah, so this series previews the groups and teams for African Cup 2023, which confusingly takes place in January 2024. And we're changing our usual format here because we did a full series for the 2021 African Cup, which was played in January 2022.
Yeah, and there we did the usual overviews of World and African Cups, as well as a look at their local cup history. And that series featured a deep dive into the team's history in the African Cup finals. And as always, it examined the recent history of the teams.
Yeah, so we think it's a bit too much to repeat that every 2 years. So in this series, we're only going to do that for the teams that were not involved in the 2021 African Cup. For those that were, we will provide links and even times in the show notes so that it can be easily reviewed.
Yeah, in this series, for teams that were covered in the 2021 African Cup, we're going to give a summary of their history as well as the recent history.
That's right. So why don't we look at the three sections that we're going to cover in this media cast?
Okay, part one, we're going to introduce the teams, or really the countries in the group, giving the location and population of each.
For part two, we'll do an overview of each team's history and recent form. So in the case of teams that did appear in the previous African Cup, which in this group is just Morocco, this will be a summary with links in the show notes to the full version history done in 2021. And in the case of teams that weren't covered in the previous tournament, which is the other three, we'll give an overview of their world, regional, and local histories with a deep dive into their history in the African Cup finals.
Yes, and that's the main section of the media cast. But in part three, we will give a comparison of the teams in ranking, in their rankings, head-to-head records, and their odds. And we'll begin with the discussion of their prospects we'll end with the discussion of their prospects and our predictions.
All right, are you ready to get into it?
I am ready. Let's get going with part one. So Connor's going to introduce a little about the countries.
That's right. So we'll begin with Morocco. Their soccer nickname is the Atlas Lions. Morocco has a population of about 37.8 million people. So that's actually kind of similar to where we are in Canada. And Morocco is a country in the far northwest of Africa. The Atlas Mountains run through it, and it's got the Atlantic Ocean on one side of the mountain chain and the Sahara Desert on the other.
You know that from personal experience, right?
That's true. I did visit Morocco in 2019, and it's a beautiful country, great diversity of landscapes, wonderful people, great food. Yeah, really great country.
Super. Okay. Second country is Congo, or Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yeah, Democratic Republic of Congo, which we'll just call Congo DR here. Their nickname is the Leopards. Their population is 102 million people. That's the fourth largest in Africa. And it's also very large geographically. It's a huge country that's right in the center of Africa, almost landlocked actually, and it kind of follows the Congo River basin, which drains Central Africa.
All right. Well, team number 3 is Zambia.
Zambia, their nickname, the nickname of the soccer team is Chipolo Polo, which means the copper bullets. Mining is a big industry there. Their population is 20.6 million, and Zambia is a landlocked country in South Central Africa, and it actually just lies to the south of Congo DR.
Right, and I guess in the same area then is Tanzania.
Yeah, Tanzania, a country that borders both of those two. Their soccer nickname is the Taifa Stars. Taifa is a Swahili word for country. Their population is 67.4 million people. It's the 5th largest population in Africa. And it's a large country in East Africa, bordering Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia, as I said. It borders those on its west. And to the east lies the Indian Ocean.
All right. Well, let us look at that in comparison to each other.
So the largest country in terms of population, which is what we're focusing on here, is Congo DR at 102 million people. So quite a large country. Following that is Tanzania at 67.5 million people. After that is Morocco at 37.8 million people. Again, a decent sized country. I think it's 11th overall in Africa. And then finally, Zambia has a population of 20.6 million. So all countries that are decently large in their own right. We don't kind of have a really small country, as we've seen some around 1 million people in Africa competing in this tournament, but all pretty large countries here.
All right. I have a flag representation of the size. What do you think, Connor?
It looks pretty good to me.
Okay, maybe I'll make Zambia a little bit smaller there. But there we go. As you say, all fairly big countries in Africa. Let us begin by looking at the history then, and we'll begin with Morocco, in which case we will just do the summary, because we covered that in the 2021 African Cup. And do you want to take it away? Tell us what they're like.
Sure. So in terms of strength, Morocco is a top-tier team in Africa. They have reached the World Cup 6 times and have come close 3 other times besides that. Having passed the group stage in 1986, they became the most successful African team with their 4th place finish at the 2022 World Cup. Their African Cup record is less impressive. Their 5 finishes in the top 4, including 2nd place in 2004 and a title win in 1976, constitutes an argument for top tier. However, their generally weak results outside of that are cause to question it. Both before and after that 2004 result, they almost invariably were knocked out at the group stage if they reached the cup at all. That 3rd tier level record has been rectified with better results in recent years.
All right. And do you want to take the recent performance? Actually, I usually do the longer history and you the more recent one. So we kind of blew that.
Yeah, I'll carry on then. So in terms of recent performance, 2017 marked an upturn in their results. They passed the group stage of the African Cup for the first time since 2004 and did so for the following 3 cups. They also qualified for the World Cup in 2018 for the first time in 20 years, and their success in 2022 truly puts them in the top tier currently. In the 2018 World Cup, their performance deserved better than a group stage exit, and likewise, their 2021 African Cup performance deserved better results than a quarterfinal finish. Morocco really seemed to be enjoying the strongest period of their history.
Yes. Are you a bit surprised by that? Their African Cup record a little less impressive than I thought, especially since the turn of the century there.
I'm very surprised, yeah, because I remember them in the World Cup in 1998. But basically, after that, with 2004 sides, it was not qualifying or getting knocked out. So that really does surprise me how long that kind of weak period lasted. I think of them as a team that should be getting past the group stage.
Yeah, and we called them kind of a top tier team, but really not so much in the African Cup, kind of a bit on and off there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a summary of Morocco's longer history and recent history, but now we'll look at the recent history in more detail. So basically, from the African Cup 2021 onwards. So how did they fare in the African Cup there?
Yeah, so they started the qualifying campaign weekly with a home draw against neighbors Mauritania. They also tied them on the road, but they otherwise beat Central African Republic and Burundi twice to comfortably finish first in their qualifying group. The tournament started well for them with wins over Ghana and Comoros, followed by a draw with Gabon that still saw them finish in first place. In the round of 16, they defeated Malawi before playing Egypt in the quarterfinals. That game finished 1-1, but Egypt got a goal in extra time, so Morocco went out at the last 8.
Right, a bit of a tough matchup there, and we said they probably deserve better from that tournament, hey?
They played quite well in that Egypt game and were more on the front foot, so yeah, a bit unlucky to lose that one.
All right. Well, the next thing we'll cover or look at is the Arab Cup in 2021. We're kind of using this to replace the local cup because North African teams don't have a local cup. And actually, the Arab Cup is quite the opposite. It covers two confederations, Asian and African teams. And let's see how they did. This was at the end of 2021.
That's right. So in the Arab Cup, they were given automatic entry. Some teams did have to qualify. And they actually won all 3 games. There were wins over Palestine, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia without conceding, actually. In the quarterfinals, they met North African rivals Algeria. The match finished 1-1 after 90 minutes, 2-2 after extra time, and then Morocco ultimately lost in penalties 5-3. So Algeria were eventual finalists, but Morocco losing in narrow margins at the quarterfinals there.
Right, and Algeria, the champions in the 2019 African Cup. So another pretty difficult pairing for Morocco at the quarterfinal stage there. Let's move on now to the World Cup. Of course, we said this was a really great performance. Let's look at it in detail.
Yeah, and it started well in the qualifying. They actually had a difficult group when you look at they were grouped with 4 teams or 3 other teams that were all in the previous African Cup, but they won all 6 of their games. That's defeating Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, and Sudan, and they finished with a goal difference of plus 19 from their 6 matches. They had to play a playoff to get into the World Cup. They met Congo DR, who they meet here. And after tying on the road, they won 4-1 at home to convincingly go through to the World Cup. At the World Cup, they were put in quite a difficult-looking group with Belgium, Croatia, and Canada. And after tying Croatia, Morocco won their next 2 games and actually topped the group. So quite an achievement. In the round of 16, they met Spain, who they defeated in penalties. They then beat Portugal before meeting France in the semifinal, where they, I guess, just ran out of steam and lost 2-0, seeking to become the first African team in the final. Didn't quite make it, but in the 3rd place match, they met Croatia, their group mates. Morocco lost this time. It was a 2-1 defeat, but 4th place at the World Cup. No African team had gone further, so it was quite an achievement, quite a run for Morocco.
Yeah, so they're coming in off that strong performance, because actually when we look at their qualifying for the African Cup here, that was played before the World Cups. But let's see how they got here.
Yeah, they got here relatively comfortably again. Their 4-team group became a 3-team group when Zimbabwe was disqualified. They did lose on the road to South Africa, but they beat them at home and beat Liberia twice to finish in 1st place with 9 points. So easy qualification where 2 out of the 3 teams were qualifying anyways.
Right, and there we go. So, sorry, that was my mistake. I was thinking that the results were based on World Cup qualifying, but I was mistaken there. So, yes, there we go. So, Morocco in the cup and the pot 1 team. So, let's move on to the pot 2 team. That is Congo DR. And in this case, we are going to kind of do the full deal because they were not part of the 2021 or 2021 African Cup. So let's begin with a look at their participation and achievements, if you want to take it away there.
So Congo DR played as Congo Leopoldville and then Congo Kinshasa in the 1960s. They were Zaire from 1970s to 1997, and then Congo DR after that. Their entry for the 1970 World Cup was not accepted, so they first entered qualification in 1974. They withdrew in 1978 and didn't enter in 1986, but have participated consistently since 1990. Their African Cup history began earlier in 1965. Here too, they missed tournaments paralleling their World Cup record, not entering in 1978 and withdrawing in 1984, but they've been consistent from 1986 onwards. The Central African group they are part of does not have a local cup, but Congo DR did participate as a guest in the 2016 COSAFA Cup for Southern African nations.
Right, joining the Southern African group. Okay, well, in terms of overall strength, Congo DR is an inconsistent team, ranging from top-tier performances to third tier. Certainly, their strongest period, when they were known as Zaire, was top tier, with their only World Cup qualification there and their only African Cup titles, 2 of them earned in 1968 and 1974. They did have other good periods. A string of finishes beyond the group stage surrounded their third place finish in the 1998 African Cup, and following the 2015 Cup, where they also finished third, making that kind of a third strong period. Those did not coincide with good results in World Cup qualifying, as the first strong period did. And in fact, outside of those periods, they've done well to even reach the African Cup. So all in all, it can be viewed as a pattern of slow waves of strength and weakness. And keeping up with that analogy, those waves have been speeding up in recent years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to zoom in a little bit with a World Cup overview, a bit of a closer look at their World Cup history. So go ahead.
So shortly after becoming a football nation, known then as Zaire, they had an incredible run, reaching the 1974 World Cup finals. They were out of their league once there, losing all 3 games. Despite reaching the final round of qualifying from 1998, they didn't come close again until 2006, where they finished second in the qualifying group, but still 5 points behind the single qualifying team. They did not reach the final round after that until 2018, where they fell only 1 point behind Tunisia, who advanced. 2022 looks similar on paper, passing a group stage to reach a final playoff with Morocco, who beat them to advance. However, that campaign was a bit less convincing than it seemed. So all in all, just 1 World Cup appearance for Congo DR.
Yeah, but a couple of fairly close brushes with it again. We'll also zoom in a little bit more on their African Cup record. So as in the World Cup, they got off to a good start here, winning the 1968 and then the 1974 African Cups. They disappeared into the woodwork after that, failing to enter a few cups until emerging strong again in the 1990s, all the way until 2006, reaching the cup every time and passing the group stage 6 out of the 8 times in that period. And it peaked in 1998 with a 3rd place finish there. After 3 non-qualifications in a row following 2006, they returned to regular participation in 2013, and here too passed the group stage 3 of the 4 tournaments, taking 3rd place again in 2015. In 2021, though, they failed to qualify for the Cup, even though it had been recently expanded to 24 teams. Okay, shall I do the local cup before we do the deep dive into the African Cup finals?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, it's a bit messy there in Central Africa. So Congo DR is part of a local group, the Central African group. That group is currently known as UNIFAC. And I'll just say here that this and other acronyms are based on French titles for the organization. So we won't concern ourselves with the titles beyond the fact that they all refer to Central Africa. So UNIFAC has no tournament for senior men's teams. It does for youth and women's teams. However, in the past, that locality did play 7 editions of the UDAC Cup, it's called, from 1984 to 1990, and 10 editions of the CMAC Cup from 2003 to 2014. However, Congo DR did not take part in those tournaments. We're not actually even part of those groups, but they are part of the UNIFAC group. In the complicated history of the Central African locality. Did you get all that, Connor?
I think I did.
Okay, yeah, it gets complicated.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's jump into our deep dive for the for Congo in Congo DR in the African Cup. Do you want to start us off there?
Sure. So Congo Kinshasa, as it was called at the time and until the 1972 campaign, reached the African Cup on their first attempt in 1965. They were not good at the group stage there, but came back much stronger in 1968, passing the group stage to reach the semi-final, where they beat Ethiopia and then Ghana in the final to earn their very first title win.
Yeah, very quick, getting about their business there. Well, that win automatically qualified them for the 1970 tournament, but they earned only a single draw and were knocked out at the group stage there. Returning as Zaire in 1972, they won a tight group, just 2 points separating 1st and 4th place. After tying Mali 3-3 in regulation time in the semi-final, they lost in extra time. In a quirk of history, they would meet the tournament host in every 3rd place match they would play, just like in this tournament. And in this case, they lost here to tournament host Cameroon to finish 4th.
Wow. 1974 saw them pass the group stage once again. They ousted host Egypt in the semi-final to face Zambia in the final. That game ended 2-2 in both regulation and extra time, requiring the game to be replayed 2 days later. Zaire won 2-0 to earn their 2nd title.
Yeah, so I wonder if the teams have a long enough memory to recall that history, because they meet each other here again. Anyway, moving on, they qualified automatically once again because of that title win in 1976, but once again earned only a single draw. And a great period was abruptly over for them, because over the next 7 editions of the Cup, they reached it only once in 1988 and fell at the group stage there.
Yeah, so we'll jump ahead to 1992. This lifted them out of their fallow 15-year period, and they passed the group stage in the next 4 editions. Reaching the quarterfinals 3 times, they were knocked out by Nigeria twice and Ghana once. In 1998, though, they beat Cameroon at that stage and took South Africa to extra time in the semi-final. They lost there, though, leading to a thrilling encounter with host Burkina Faso in the 3rd place match. With the halftime score only 1-0, the host made it 3-0 by 56 minutes, but the comeback did not start until 76. It was 3-1 even at 86 minutes, but 4 goals, 3 of them by Congo DR, left the score 4-4 at the end of regulation time. The penalty shootout was gifted to them, really, because Burkina Faso missed 2 of their first 3 shots. So an epic comeback in the 1998 third place match.
Yeah, and once again meeting the hosts in the third place match there. And that tournament proved the peak of a second strong period, as the next 4 editions saw them knocked out at the group stage twice and in the quarterfinals twice. And that was by Senegal in 2002. Senegal, who went on to their best World Cup performance later that year. And in 2006, they were knocked out by Egypt, who would go on to win 3 titles in a row. So a bit unlucky with the partners that they met in the quarterfinals there.
Yeah. A poor period followed, though. Congo DR failed to qualify for 3 editions straight and returned only in 2013. Though they were knocked out at the group stage there, it was the start of a third strong period. 2015 was the peak of it, with another third place finish, beating rivals Congo, falling to Ivory Coast in the semifinal, and as in 1998, beating the host, Equatorial Guinea, to take third place.
Right, so meeting the host again, and that strong period actually continued by passing the group stage over the next 2 tournaments, falling to Ghana in 2017 and to the surprising Madagascar on penalties in the tournament's first round of 16 in 2019. However, the period ended with failing to qualify for the 2021 edition, which is the first thing we will look at in our recent look. But overall, Connor, what do you make of their longer history?
A bit up and down, of course. I mean, the 2 title wins are impressive, though they were many, many years ago when there were fewer teams competing. But yeah, kind of an interesting team. Inconsistency is kind of what comes to mind.
Yeah, but you know, we may think we may kind of underrate them because they didn't make the 2021 African Cup, but you know, they're a team that regularly reaches the cup and fairly regularly passes the group stage too.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at when they didn't pass the group stage, though. That was in the most recent cup in 2021. What happened, Connor?
Yeah, it was a bit of a disastrous campaign because they came in as the number 1 seed in the group, along with Gabon, Angola, and Gambia. But they finished 3rd in the group stage. They actually tied their first 3 games and only lost once. That was an away game to Gabon, who bested them. They themselves bested group winners Gambia, but the damage was done by the fact that they only won 1 of their games at home, and that was that final one against Gambia. So it was a very tight group. Gambia and Gabon had 10 points and Congo DR 9, but they nevertheless were the 3rd place team with only the top 2 advancing. So they missed out.
Yeah, well, a ghastly result, but really not a terrible performance there.
No, I mean, only 1 defeat, I guess, is one way to look at it, but only 2 wins, you know, as a number 1 seed is, I guess, the other way. So,
yeah, a bit inconsistent, but yeah, anyway, we'll talk about that more later. Let's move on to their next campaign. That's the World Cup in 2022.
Yeah, so they were a pot 1 team again, but actually the weakest of the pot 1 teams. Their campaign in the 4-team group stage got off to a bit of a weak start with ties against Tanzania and Benin, but they improved after that, beating Madagascar, who they did lose to on the road, but then beating Tanzania and Benin at the end to finish 1st place in the group. It was close, though. It was just a point ahead of Benin, but an important finish because only 1 team, the group winners, made it to the playoff. And as we saw in that playoff, they met Morocco, who they meet here. And despite tying Morocco at home, they were beaten heavily on the road. So it was Morocco and not Congo that qualified for the World Cup.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so yeah, another fairly close brush with the World Cup, but ultimately a fairly weak performance compared to what we saw with Morocco.
Yeah. certainly not bad to win the group and to get within a final step, considering they have only been to one World Cup before, and that was in the 70s. But yeah, they were outclassed by Morocco in that two-legged.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say, because it wasn't a weak performance. But I think that going into that final round, that was one of the more lopsided pairings at the final playoff stage.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we don't have a local cup for Congo DR, and so African Cup 2023 qualifying is the most recent campaign for them.
Yeah, they got off to a very poor start. They lost at home to Gabon and then lost away to eventual bottom finishers Sudan. So it looked, desperate at that point, but they turned it around and won their next 4 games. Even if their away win in Mauritania was awarded to them, they had tied initially, but Congo was given the 3 points. So yeah, there's those 4 points or 4 wins from their last 4 games. Actually saw them top the group with 12 points ahead of Mauritania and qualify for this tournament.
Right, and we've seen in a couple of campaigns that they tend to get off to weak starts, and then if they do end up doing well, it's because they pick up steam. I wonder if that'll be significant in the cup here.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation, but certainly true over their recent qualifying campaigns.
Right. Okay, well, that's our look at Congo DR, and now it's time to move on to what I confess, Connor, to be my favorite African team, Zambia.
All right.
So we're gonna do the full deal on Zambia too, because they also were not part of the 2021 African Cup. So we begin with a look at their overall participation and achievement, and then their strength.
So Zambia has consistently entered both World Cup and African Cup qualifying since 1970. They've never failed to participate in World Cup qualification and withdrew only once from the African Cup. That was in 1988. They are also members of COSAFA, which is the Council of Southern African Football Associations, which is made up of 13 countries in Southern Africa. And they've never missed any of its 25 editions held since 1997.
Right. Well, in terms of strength, Zambia, like Congo DR, ranges from being a top-tier team to a third-tier one. They've never reached the World Cup, although they were close in 1974 and even closer in 1994. Those 2 years parallel good showings in the African Cups, coming second in the 1974 and the 1994 editions of that competition. While 1974 was a fairly isolated success, as was a third-place finish in 1982, 1994 was a strong period in the 1990s in general that saw them reach the semi-finals 3 out of 4 cups. All the more impressive and poignant because their entire team was killed in a plane crash in the midst of it. Actually, not the entire team, Connor. They had 3 European-based players who were not on the plane. Anyway, motivated at the 20-year anniversary of that, Zambia earned their best result, an African Cup title in 2012, and Gabon. And the tournament took place in Gabon, which is where the disaster happened. Unlike 1974 and 1994, there was no reflection in their World Cup play. And in fact, outside of those periods, Zambia is a third-tier team, struggling to reach the cup and knocked out at the group stage if they do.
Wow, an amazing story, especially with that African Cup win. Is that that kind of history and backstory what enamors you so much?
Yeah, it's a big part of it because I was able to watch the games in 2012 there, so that was quite emotional. It's also why I like Renard, their coach, not just because of the cool way he dresses.
Yeah, that's right. He's a charismatic guy, and he was the coach, of course, of Zambia when they won it.
Yes, that's right. And interestingly, by the way, the coach of Morocco for a time as well.
Yeah.
Let's take a bit of a closer look at the World Cup history.
All right, so 1994 was Zambia's closest approach to the World Cup. A touching story because of the Gabon air disaster, which you mentioned, the plane crashing en route to a qualifier against Senegal. The new team amazingly completed the qualification, missing USA 1994 by finishing just 1 point behind Morocco. That had been only the second time they reached the final round of qualification, having done so in 1974, though they finished far behind the group winner, who was also Morocco that time. After 1994, though, they reached the final round of every edition except for 2014 and 2022, but were outclassed once there, finishing in the bottom half every time. That should have been the case in 2018, given the tough group they were in with Algeria, Nigeria, and Cameroon. Yikes. However, they surprised, as they sometimes do, by finishing second. However, it was not very close to reaching the cup, as they finished 5 points behind Nigeria.
Yeah, so part of the other reason I like them is just a very interesting history. Anyway, let's look at the African Cup in overview. So Zambia failed to reach most of the early African Cups, reaching the finals in only 4 of the 10 editions before 1990. They did sometimes surprise, though, finishing second in 1974 there and third in 1982. 1974 was a brief spike in their form, paralleling that good year in World Cup qualification. But the 1990s began a legitimate good period, amazingly not interrupted by their losses of the Gabon air disaster, which actually was in April 1993. They finished in the top 3 of the 4 times from 1990 to 1996. Finishing second in 1994. So in terms of their record, you would never know anything happened.
Yeah, really amazing.
Yeah, they continued to reach the finals consistently, missing only in 2004, but they were knocked out of the group stage every time until 2010. Reaching the quarterfinals in 2010 for the first time in 14 years was the only indication of what was to come in 2012. Motivated by the tournament being hosted by Gabon, the site of the disaster, they were led by manager Hervé Renard to an unlikely victory. Following that glorious year, though, they were knocked out of the group stage in the following 2 cups and then failed to reach 3 cups in a row from 2017 to 2021. And missing 3 cups in a row had never happened in their history before.
Yeah, and 2 of those cups featured 24 teams, so pretty amazing that they failed to make it, actually.
Yeah, they really fell into a slump there, which they are hopefully coming out of now. Okay, we're just going to do the local cup record before we jump into the deep dive. And the COSAFA is probably, well, one of the strongest local tournaments in Africa, and their record in the COSAFA Cup, which, as you said, is the Council of Southern African football teams, it does reflect their strong periods in African Cup play to a degree. They did win the local cup in the periods of strength that we described in the mid-1990s and in 2013. But it doesn't reflect their record in that the record of the COSAFA Cup is much stronger overall, so it doesn't really reflect the weak periods that they had in the bigger cups. They've done really well here with 7 titles over the 19 editions, and only once in 2021 did they fail to pass the group stage. So another kind of indication of their recent slump there.
Yeah, interesting parallel.
Right, yeah. Okay, now it is time for us to jump into the deep dive.
So Zambia, their first successful qualification came in their 3rd attempt. That was in 1974. They finished second in the group behind host Egypt and beat Congo in extra time of the semifinal to face Zaire in the final. This game we've talked about already. It was ended in a draw but not resolved in extra time, so it had to be replayed. Though 55,000 watched the first game, only 1,000 people attended 2 days later to watch Zambia ultimately lose to Zaire but second place was nevertheless an impressive result.
Right. Zambia failed actually to reach the following edition in 1976, and that actually established a pattern of reaching every second cup, a pattern that would last until 1990. So no tournament in 1976 for them, but in 1978, a 1-1-1 record was not enough to see them past the group stage.
Missing in 1980, they opened 1982 with a loss to Algeria. The third game against Nigeria would decide second place in the group, and they impressively won 3-0. A loss to host Libya in the semifinal sent them to the third place match, which they won, beating Algeria this time, having lost to them earlier on.
Right. Well, failing to reach the finals in 1984 and in 1988, they did reach the tournament in 1986, but they fell at the group stage in a fairly weak showing there. The pattern would predict that they reached the cup in 1990, and so they did. But now a new pattern took hold, and that was one of consistently reaching the cup, because from 1990 to 2015, they missed only one edition of the cup. And 1990 was a third place finish for them. It began a strong period. They were undefeated in the group stage in that 1990 edition and fell to Nigeria in the semi-final to eventually finish third. And then in 1992, it was a quarterfinal finish going out to Ivory Coast in extra time.
The 1994 tournament took place just less than a year after the Gabon air disaster, and in fact, two players who had been European-based and weren't on the flight were part of this rebuilt team. They went all the way to the final, where they met Nigeria. After exchanging goals in the first 5 minutes, Nigeria won the game, scoring shortly after halftime.
Right. Amazingly, the team continued to do well, taking third place in 1996, where they were again undefeated in the group stage, and they beat Egypt, but then were knocked out by Tunisia in the semi-final and beat Ghana to take third place.
Yeah, another medal for them, though.
Yeah.
But their strength diminished from there. Zambia did reach the following three cups, but were knocked out at the group stage in each and actually earned fewer points every time. It hit bottom in 2004, the only year in this long period they did not qualify. But they returned in 2006 to reach the group stage, then and also in 2008. 2010 saw them once again pass the group stage, but they were knocked out by Nigeria on penalties in the quarterfinals.
Right, and at the risk of repetition here, 2012 was that emotional cup for Zambia. The tournament was actually co-hosted by Gabon almost 20 years, actually 19 years after the disaster. And more specifically, it had occurred after a takeoff from a refueling stop in Libreville, Gabon. While all of Gambia's games actually took place in Equatorial Guinea, the co-host of the tournament, the final was in Libreville itself. And there they went scoreless with Ivory Coast, and the match went to penalties. It's pretty dramatic, so we'll tell the story. Each team scored their 5 regulation shots and the 2 shots after. So if you think about it, it was leaving the matter to the reluctant penalty takers. But for Ivory Coast, they had some big names coming up. English star in the English League, Yaya Toure, stepped up and he missed the 8th penalty. But unfortunately, Zambia missed theirs too, so they failed to take advantage of it. Ivory Coast had another English star up their sleeve, Gervinho, and he missed the 9th penalty. And then Zambia didn't spurn this apparent gift, and defender Stopila Sunzu stepped up to score the glorious winner. So a real thrilling end to the tournament there.
Yeah, and that was an Ivory Coast team kind of in full flight of their golden generation. Drogba,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so quite a victory.
Uh-huh.
As if spent by that exertion, though, Zambia declined after the tournament, knocked out at the group stage in the following two cups, and then not qualifying for three in a row after that. 2019 marked the only time they missed two in a row since 1992, and then missing three in a row by failing to qualify in 2021 was a first.
Right, so that is the interesting history of Zambia, and we will take a look at how they've been doing recently. Actually, not so bad in their local cup. We're just gonna that tournament's played pretty much every year, so we'll just look at the last one in detail. But in 2019, they did win that Southern African Cup, but we won't go into detail. Let's look at their African Cup in 2021.
So Zambia were bested by group winner Algeria and exchanged home win with last place Botswana, and actually home losses with Zimbabwe. They lost out to Zimbabwe despite beating them away in the final game. They finished a point behind Zimbabwe, who took the last qualifying spot. So though Zambia came in seeded second, they ended up coming third in the qualifying group. So disappointing for them. 2 wins, a draw, and 3 losses saw them narrowly miss out on the tournament.
Right, and disappointing also because that was the 3rd time in a row. In the local cup in 2021, that was actually one of their worst performances at the local cup. So really, almost the bottom of a bad period for them here. They were knocked out in the first round, and those are mostly 3rd-tier teams in the region, which is why they do well. So a pretty poor performance. Let's see how they did in their World Cup 2022 qualifying campaign.
Yeah, so they entered at the group stage. There they came in as the 2nd seed, but were actually bested by 4th seed Equatorial Guinea, who finished ahead of them. They lost to Algeria twice and beat Mauritania twice, but they finished 3rd in the group stage. I said Algeria, I meant Tunisia. Tunisia were the group winners and were the team that advanced to the qualifying spot.
Yeah, just one team advancing from that group. Back to the local cup, they actually were winners of the 2022 COSAFA Cup. But again, there's one more to come. So, well, let's take a look at it right away here. So 2023 COSAFA Cup, do you want to talk us through and maybe see some of the teams that are in this locality?
Yeah, so again, not every team sends their top players. Zambia lost to Malawi, but then beat Comoros and Seychelles, 2 small island nations, to finish 2nd in the group and advance. In the semifinal, they met South Africa, so arguably the biggest team in the group, but Zambia beat them 2-1, and then they met Lesotho in the final and beat them 1-0 to regain their crown.
Yeah, there we go. So a good showing by Zambia, and I got to say a good showing by Lesotho, which is usually a pretty weak team. Okay, and then the most recent campaign has been the one that got them to this cup. So let's talk about how they did.
Yeah, they were grouped with Ivory Coast. They lost their opener in Ivory Coast, but they didn't lose again. They would win 4 straight before tying their final game away in Comoros. But it actually didn't affect them much, as they still finished 1st place in the group ahead of Ivory Coast, with both those teams advancing to this tournament.
Yeah, actually a tie against almost any African team on the road is pretty good. But I'm most impressed by the 3-0 home win over Ivory Coast there.
Yeah, that's a pretty convincing statement victory. And actually, they ended up finishing 1st place on goal differential. So it was significant from that perspective as well.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, that brings us to the end of Zambia, and now we turn our attention to the 4th team, Tanzania. So we'll begin with an overview of their participation and strength.
Tanzania joined World Cup play in 1974, but withdrew from the following tournament. They missed 2 in a row in 1990 and 94, but have participated consistently from 1998. They withdrew too from their first entry to the African Cup in 1968 and went on to withdraw from 5 tournaments up until 1994. From 1996, they've never failed to complete a qualification. Their local group is CASAFA, a grouping of Central African teams. They withdrew from 4 of the 8 CECAFA Cup editions since 1973, most recently in 2000.
Yes, and in terms of strength, Tanzania is a 3rd or even sometimes a 4th tier team in Africa. A 4th tier team is defined by rarely passing a preliminary stage of qualification or finishing at the bottom if the first round is a group stage. And Tanzania has had such campaigns. Generally, though, they're a bit more competitive than that. But though they may pass a preliminary, they generally finish in the bottom half of a group. However, they overcame that to reach the African Cup in 1980 and in 2019. In both cases, they were knocked out at the group stage. They've won 2 of the 38 CECAFA or Central African Cups since its rebranding in 1973. These were in 1995 and when they hosted in 2010. So let's take a, oh, sorry.
No, sorry, I was just
we'll take a we're overlapping each other. Connor's going to bring us the bit of a closer look at the World Cup here.
From 1974 until 2010, Tanzania did nothing better than making it to a second knockout round. Since they had dropped out of an almost completed group stage in 1994, 2010 became the first group stage as well as their most competitive performance. They have been reasonably competitive since, passing any preliminary rounds and finishing 3rd in their semi-final round groups. They remain far, however, from the final round.
Right, and I'll give you the Regional Cup or African Cup overview. So until reaching the expanded 2019 African Cup, their single qualification, as we said, was in 1980. They had come close in 1974, but not otherwise. They passed preliminary stages about half of the time, but fell in round 2 knockouts when they did, mildly competitive at best. Their first group round qualification was in 1992, and they went undefeated at home. However, losing all road games saw them finishing last. And it was similar in 1996 when they won 4 of 5 games at home, but lost all on the road. From 2000 to 2004, they lost all games in over 3 qualifying campaigns, which included a group round, 1 group round and knockouts at the hands of Burundi and traditional foes Mauritius. After a competitive campaign in 2008, they generally finished 3rd of 4 in their groups, taking some points at the game level, but never threatening at the campaign level. 2019, though, saw them competitive enough to take 2nd in their group and thereby reach the expanded cup. There, as in 1980, though, they were unable to pass the group stage. And before our deep dive, we'll take a look at the local cup. And there are kind of two Central African groups. The one Tanzania is part of is with countries like Uganda and Kenya. Tanzania's local group is actually the Council for East and Central African Football Associations, and they participate in the CECAFA Cup. And interestingly, it's the oldest tournament in Africa, one of the oldest tournaments in the world, in fact, with the first edition way back in 1926. So it has undergone changes in name and membership, and it received its current name in a 1973 rebranding. Sadly, though, its impressive history has fallen apart in recent years, with several tournaments being cancelled, and the tournament eventually becoming an under-23 tournament in 2021. So the future of the local tournament is a bit unclear. The region or the locality is made up of 3rd-tier teams or lower. So Tanzania is one of the strongest teams in this CECAFA region, behind Uganda and Kenya. They won the title in 2010 when they hosted and came fourth in the next 3 tournaments, but they've grown weaker since, not even passing a group stage in 2017. However, they took 4th place in the last edition, which was in 2019. All right, now it's time for our deep dive, but honestly, it's not very deep because they've only been to 2 tournaments. Do you wanna talk us through that one?
Yeah, so really for Tanzania, reaching the tournaments proved the main achievement because once there, they were out of their depth. So in 1980, they lost their opening game to Nigeria and were out after losing the second to Egypt. A draw with Ivory Coast salvaged some pride, but still left them in last place.
Yeah, and that draw would prove their only African Cup finals points, because in their next tournament in 2019, they lost all 3 games. Realistically, they were grouped with the 2 teams that would play the final. So they really only had hopes of taking points against the other team. Kenya, Algeria and Senegal were the 2 strong teams in the group. Their game against Kenya proved a competitive 3-2 loss, but unfortunately it was another last place finish for Tanzania. All right, and that brings us to the 2021, which is our first look at their recent history. So we'll look at these ones in more detail.
All right, so starting with qualifying for the 2021 African Cup, Tanzania went undefeated at home, beating Equatorial Guinea and Libya and suffering only a draw with group winner Tunisia, but they lost all 3 on the road. That meant they finished 3rd in the group, behind Equatorial Guinea, surprisingly actually ahead of Libya, who were the 2nd seed in the group, but it wasn't enough for Tanzania to qualify for the most recent tournament.
Right, and we have seen that that pattern of being quite strong at home, but very poor on the road. But that is not the case in their World Cup 2022 campaign, where it was kind of the opposite.
Yeah, strangely. Their journey started with a qualifying preliminary match with Burundi. Both matches went 1-1. That's the home and away tie. But Tanzania won in a penalty shootout at home. That put them in the group stage. Here, their home form was weak, as you mentioned. They beat Madagascar, but lost to both Benin and Congo DR. But on the road, they were undefeated, beating Benin and tying their other 2 matches. So overall, it wasn't a bad campaign. It left them with 2 wins, 2 draws, and 2 losses. But they were 3 points behind Congo DR for the one place, the one playoff spot to decide who would go to the World Cup. So competitive, but ultimately a 3rd place finish for Tanzania in the group stage.
Right, and as we saw in their longer history, that's a fairly standard finish for them in World Cup play. But they did a little bit better in the 2023 qualifying campaign, the campaign for this tournament. And again, that exact same pattern.
It was the exact same pattern. That's a 1 win and 2 losses at home, so a bit uncharacteristic, but undefeated on the road. For Tanzania, they lost at home to Algeria, but tied them on the road, and actually what proved a crucial point in their final game. They otherwise shared home and away wins with Uganda and then bested Niger. So as the chips fell, Algeria won the group. Tanzania finished 2nd, a point ahead of Uganda, and the top 2 qualified. So that's how Tanzania got to just their 3rd African Cup.
Yeah, so doing a bit better than their 3rd place finish, reaching it to 2nd and reaching the cup. Okay, well, we move on now to section 3 or part 3 of the media cast. So we're going to kind of look at the teams in comparison to each other. We begin by looking at the pots that they came from.
Yeah, so Morocco is the pot 1 team, and actually they are the highest ranked team in Africa currently. Not really a surprise given their run to the semifinal of the World Cup. They're 13th overall. So yeah, Morocco really the kind of the most difficult game, or the most difficult pot one team you could be drawn against. Congo, or DR Congo, on the other hand, were the sixth ranked team in pot two. So they were kind of just squeaked into pot two. So a bit of a discrepancy between the pot one and pot two teams. Zambia came in as the fourth ranked team in pot three. And Tanzania come in actually as the lowest ranked team in the entire tournament. So this group includes the top ranked and the lowest ranked African teams coming into this tournament.
Yeah, spanning the whole range there. And that'll be actually an interesting place maybe to start the discussion when we get there. But we're going to look at the FIFA rankings, both currently and over the course of the last 10 years or so. And we begin with Morocco.
Yeah, so Morocco are 13th in FIFA rankings, as I mentioned, 19th in ELO. They actually peaked at 11th in December 2022, shortly after their incredible World Cup run. That's kind of a marked rise from basically 47th in June 2019 and as low as 92nd in June 2015, kind of before their upturn in form that we've seen over the last couple of years. So quite the rise for Morocco. Maybe they won't stay there, but top 20 in both systems, very impressive.
Yeah, and again, as you say, a lot of that due to their performance in the World Cup there. But that is a very consistent rise. 10 years ago, they were basically where Congo DR and Zambia are now. So this is fairly recent form for Morocco. And the question is whether they'll maintain that form.
Yeah. Congo is ranked 64th in FIFA and 74th in ELO, so that's quite a drop from pot one team Morocco. 69th is kind of where they've been for the last couple years. They were actually in the top 40 in the FIFA rankings and as high as 28 in June 2017. So they've slipped down quite a bit from where they were 5 years ago, but they moved up a little bit recently, and I guess if they continue to qualify for tournaments, then they might continue to rise further. But 69th and 74th is where they are now.
Right, and the FIFA rankings you described there are far more dramatic than the ELO rankings, which we trust more. The highest they were there was about 61st, and they did drop down over the period, and then rose back up to 74th. So not so dramatic in the ELO rankings there.
Yeah, actually, FIFA seems kind of unnecessarily erratic.
Yeah.
Zambia,
right.
meanwhile, are 82nd in FIFA and 78th in ELO. So according to the ELO rankings, they're just 4 points behind Congo DR in the rankings. Zambia have been fairly consistent. It's a bit of a rise over the last probably 5 years, but not by much. They were kind of in the 90s or 80s before that. Actually 103rd in ELO in December 2018. So a bit of a rise, but nothing too dramatic.
Yeah, and I'm a bit surprised by that because they really have been in a slump over the past 5 years. But definitely seem to be coming out of it. And it'll be good to discuss whether they're really 18 points behind Congo DR, which the FIFA rankings have, or just 4 points behind which the ELO rankings have.
Yeah. Finally, the pot 4 team Tanzania, they're 122nd in FIFA and 119th in ELO, so consistent in both systems. They've been often actually in the 130s for their recent history, never really above 100. So they're kind of where they're at, maybe a little bit of a rise, but nothing dramatic, still kind of below that 100 mark.
Yeah, and I think the rise probably down to the fact that they reached 2 of the 3 last African Cups. But as we saw, they're a bit out of their depth once there. So we'll talk about whether we think that's going to be the case here.
Yeah.
So there's a look at the rankings, and now let's look at another comparison, head-to-head records. This is pretty interesting.
Yeah, Congo and Morocco, to start with, have a very interesting record. It's 3 wins apiece and 7 draws. So I guess it's an even record in terms of points, but that 7 draws is a bit of a quirk, you have to say.
Yeah, it really is. They have actually met 3 times recently. We saw in the 2022 final round there, the final playoff, that they tied in the first leg, but Morocco won quite convincingly in the second. Their most recent meeting before that was in the 2017 African Cup group stage, which Congo DR won. So actually, they're 1-1-1 over their recent meetings.
All right, moving on to Morocco and Zambia. They've met quite a few times. Morocco has a winning record, but it's close. It's 6 wins for Morocco, just 1 draw, and 5 wins for Zambia.
Yeah, no real recent ones to go on here. In fact, the most recent meeting was in 1998. So, but still interesting that they are so evenly matched.
Between Morocco and Tanzania, they've met 4 times. Morocco has won 3, but Tanzania does have 1 win in there as well.
Right, and all of those matches were between 2012 and 2014, and Tanzania did win the home leg at home there in 2014.
We'll move on next to Congo DR versus Zambia. They've met many times, they're neighbors, of course, and have a very close record. It's 5 wins for Congo DR, but 4 draws and 4 wins for Zambia.
Yeah, so another really interesting head-to-head history. Not too much recent, though. In 2015 African Cup, they met and tied 1-1.
For Congo DR versus Tanzania, again, relatively close. It's 3 wins for Congo DR, 2 draws, and 1 win for Tanzania.
Yeah, and they've met recently in World Cup qualifying. They tied in Congo DR, but actually Congo DR won away in that case.
And then finally, Zambia versus Tanzania, again, 2 neighbors. Zambia has a better record overall with 5 wins, 2 draws, and just 1 defeat.
Right, and kind of like Morocco and Zambia, they haven't met recently, 2004, their most recent meeting. Okay, well, that brings us to odds, and actually we do like to see what the odds makers are thinking, but unfortunately we're too far out from the tournament to do that. So we are thinking of an update podcast closer to the tournament, so maybe we'll get a chance to see what the odds makers think there. I think we'd better go back to the rankings and take our discussion from there. So I'll just start by asking whether you think Morocco really is that far ahead of the other teams here.
I mean, I guess I have to say no. I mean, they are quite ahead in the rankings, but we all know that that's because of their run in the World Cup. I mean, take nothing away from it. They had to beat very, very good teams, beating Belgium and Spain and Portugal, en route. But, I think a good World Cup can inflate any team's rating. So I think they are the clear number 1 team in this group, but probably not quite as much as the gap shows.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think they're unassailable here, even though the rankings would kind of suggest that. I don't think Morocco are quite as strong as other first-tier teams, despite their first-place ranking in FIFA. And one thing I've been thinking about as we've been going through this, we saw it, say, with Zambia after their 2012 win, and then in a couple of other places, is sometimes after a big success, the team is kind of breathing out, or that kind of used up all their energy, if you will. Do you think Morocco might do that here?
I don't necessarily think so, but I think it's possible. I mean, it's sometimes everything comes together in one tournament, and now a year later, can you replicate the same set of circumstances and that same togetherness? It's not probably as easy. So yeah, I think what you said, they're not unassailable here. Yeah, I'm not predicting that they would have a catastrophic collapse, but I think just because they went on a good run in the World Cup doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go on exactly a similar run in this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, like their African Cup record is really not that impressive. If we do call them a top tier team, they usually only make it to the quarterfinals. However, making it to the quarterfinals does mean that they pass the group stage. So, maybe what we're talking about here, breathing out after their World Cup success, will be more of a matter of in the final stages rather than in the group stage. But do you see them dropping any points?
I think it's possible. I think especially if they have the group, wrapped up, or they could, play a B team in their final match if it comes to that. I don't see them losing necessarily, but yeah, I think it's possible they drop points. And I just think it is an interesting point that you made about sometimes teams having won a great run and not following it up. And I think a lot of teams in Africa have a different record in the African Cup and World Cup. They may be strong in one, but not the other. And I think that just kind of shows that even good teams are not necessarily consistent all the time.
Yeah, and we're thinking about so the Morocco really do have some really good players, but they're playing in Europe. A lot of these guys, I'm thinking of like Hakim Ziyech and the defender there, Ashraf.
Hakimi, yeah.
Yeah, Hakimi. That's Ashraf Hakimi. And they're pretty busy with their club play right now. So I wonder, how determined they'll be in this African Cup.
Yeah, that's a good point too, whether they'll all show up, right?
Yeah, I mean the African-based players may feel they have more to play for than the ones who are already successful in their club careers.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe the next issue to discuss is that 18-point difference in FIFA between Zambia and Congo DR, and just 4 points in the ELO rankings. How close do you think these two are?
Um, tough to say. I might actually defer to you to answer your own question.
Okay.
Congo DR, they're the fourth largest country in Africa, with 100 million people. You'd think that they should consistently be up there with some of the other strong African teams, and yet they're not, and they've had some inconsistent performances. So, both for Congo DR and Zambia, their glory years, were really a long time ago. Zambia, of course, did have that 2012 World Cup. But in recent times, neither team has really kind of threatened the top tier team. So, yeah, I don't know. I think they're probably fairly close, but I'm not sure which one I would say is kind of a better reflection. So maybe I'll turn it over to you if you have some insight.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if we look at the facts, Congo DR have, kind of edging them in every metric I measure: a slightly better head-to-head record, a slightly better ranking, slightly better record over the past few years. And yet, I have a good feeling that Zambia is kind of coming back into form. I mean, we saw in their long African Cup finals history a fairly similar pattern. They both had some periods of really good success, and then some periods of kind of basement. I would say Congo DR is kind of in a fairly good period right now. That's been going on for a while, and I don't think their 2021 failure to reach the African Cup really is a strike against that. So I think they're in a good run of form. But Zambia, maybe I feel like they have momentum, kind of coming out of a pretty poor period. I just can't get that 3-0 win over Ivory Coast out of my mind. That's I don't really feel like Congo DR have done anything like that, but maybe I'm just kind of creating a narrative because I like them.
Yeah. I mean, Congo DR, when they get to the African Cup, they typically pass the group stage. They were third place finishers only in 2015, which is not that long ago. And admittedly, they came very close to the World Cup, losing that playoff to Morocco. I just kind of feel like I expect a bit more from them all the time, and they don't quite deliver. They've had some good players, some good European-based players too, which they have now. Players in the English top flight, players in France, that sort of thing. But yeah, they can't kind of, in my mind, don't seem to kind of push on. So I maybe give them a slight edge, but I see them both as kind of coming in as second-tier teams.
Yeah, I agree with you there. They're pretty similar if I kind of step back and take a look at it. I definitely agree with the ELO rankings that they're close to each other rather than Congo DR having an 18-point advantage. I'm really, frankly, looking forward to it because I think both of them can be quite dangerous teams, you know. So I'm almost thinking that there's a chance that they might challenge Morocco, but that would require kind of a bit of a lapse from Morocco too.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Yeah.
talked about country. Sorry, did you have something to add
Go
there?
ahead.
Okay, you talked about country sizes. Well, Tanzania is one of the most disappointing teams in Africa, given their population. We saw they have 67 million.
Yeah.
And they're consistently kind of a third to fourth tier team. So I'm not sure what the reason for that is, but it looks like here too they're kind of just making up the numbers.
Yeah, I fear that could be the case as it has been in their two other previous tournaments. I mean, they did well to get here. You know, they did tie away in Algeria, which is good. But, you know, they also have been losing home games. They kind of scraped in ahead of Uganda, which, you know, was good. Tanzania was actually the pot four team, so they did well to finish second and reach the cup. But there's nothing that kind of stands out as you know, they have a huge shock or a huge kind of dark horse tagged coming into this. I think they will struggle. There's some pretty good teams in this group. I think it might be difficult for them to really collect points against these teams.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, we have seen a couple of teams of this strength do well in the African Cup recently. Gambia and Madagascar and stuff like that, and kind of harking back to what I said earlier, I think those countries are kind of seeing this as, wow, we reached the African Cup. This is our big opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, and I think they're highly motivated. I'm not sure Tanzania have that. I mean, they were at the 2019 African Cup, so they've kind of, you know, there's not a huge thrill in reaching this cup for them. I just don't see much in their favor.
Yeah, I think they'll be up against it. You know, a draw is possible, but I think Congo and DR and Zambia, if they're playing well and playing to form, you know, I'd expect those teams to beat Tanzania and of course Morocco as well. So you know they could do an upset. I don't see much more than a point probably, which would match their best ever total. But yeah, it's always difficult coming in as the kind of the lowest ranked team as well, and then being put in. Yeah, kind of a strong group. I think it will be difficult for them.
Yeah, well, even a point could make a big impact on the teams above. I mean, if they do take a point off any of the teams above, it would kind of scuttle their campaign. So they do have a chance of playing a spoiler role here, but I don't really see them challenging any of the teams above.
Yeah, I do see it quite close between Congo, DR, and Zambia. I think Morocco will win it. Tanzania will finish last in the group. But you know, if either Congo or Zambia tie Morocco, or you know, conversely tie Tanzania, that will probably be the difference between those two teams. Um, yeah, or certainly could be, including whether a team gets through in as a third place finisher.
Yeah, well, that's a point too, and that's quite possible here. If all of the teams beat Tanzania, then probably they would have a chance of all going through. I had a point to kind of. Oh, you mentioned the word form. I really think this comes down to form, which is quite unpredictable, beyond the usual unpredictability. I think all of these teams are kind of subject to good form and bad form. So I think it's really actually hard to make predictions, and anything could happen. But on that note, I'll try to pin you down to giving me the prediction. Come on, Connor, lay it on me.
All right. Well, I'm going to say Morocco first. I actually think they have a shot at winning this tournament. They come in as a top-ranked team. I think with their World Cup semifinals, anything less than semifinals would be a really big disappointment. But I think they're trying to get to the final for sure. I remember their coach saying, if we want to be the best in the world, we have to be the best in Africa first. So I think they are putting quite a bit of emphasis on this tournament. They actually host the next African Cup. So I think they're using this as a chance to have two good tournaments in before the next World Cup cycle. So so that's kind of a long-winded tangent, but I do think Morocco will win the group. I think they are building towards the 2026 World Cup and hosting the next version. I am going to stick with the pot order. I'm going to say Congo DR second and Zambia third, and then Tanzania I see as fourth.
All right. Well, actually, that tangent you went on was good. It was it kind of persuaded me in their favor. But I'm going to say Zambia with 9 points, and I don't care what happens otherwise. No, I'm just joking. I got to go with you. I am really hoping for a good performance from Zambia, and maybe I'm going to put them ahead of Congo DR. I think Morocco not finishing first would be a lapse, and then, as you said, there's a lot to suggest that they won't lapse here. So I'll say Morocco first. I can't really say why, but I'm going Zambia second, Congo DR third, and Tanzania, I think they'd be lucky to get a point, because I think it will be pretty competitive among the three teams at the top. So I don't think, I think all of them will take that game against Tanzania quite seriously, so as not to drop points among the top teams.
All right.
Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion and of our look at this group, and then in fact of our African Cup look at the group. So we will be coming out with player podcasts for these teams. We are currently finishing up the Asian Cup player podcast. So when that's done, we'll move on to the player podcast for these teams. In terms of the groups, we might do an update podcast if we find that there's kind of enough information on them to merit it. And if keep your eye out in January for that, just before the cup, and keep your eye out also for the player podcast for these teams, where we'll kind of go through and look at the candidates. We originally planned to tag on our past, present, and future plans for the mediacast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We would like to thank Pixabay and Alexei Ivanov of Mappa Music for the wonderful background music accompanying this mediacast.